How to Make Our Mental Pictures Come True, a series of easy lessons in the art of visualizing by George Schuebel. Part 2, Chemistry of Visualizing. Chapter 4, Mental Chemical Developing Agencies. We have said that the sensitized film in the camera serves, among other purposes, that of developing the photographic light image impressed upon it. This, we say, is a process of building up the light image from the matter within the film substance. It is an internal building up out of the plastic substance itself. Although it is a structural process of which we have no visible evidence when we look upon the impressed photographic film, it is not the entire developing process. So, in order to induce a complete outward photographic development, the photographer finds it necessary to supply matter external for the moment to the film substance, and this is what may be termed a building up of the image from matter outside of the substance of the photographic film. The photographer accomplishes this by what is known technically in photography as developing agents, which will start into action a further chemical process of development, and in this wise bring out or make clear in detail the invisible light image which is impressed on the film substance. However, these developing agents or substances are not used by themselves to produce development, but are mixed in certain scientific proportions so that a compound chemical developing substance is obtained, which mixed with water becomes the chemical bath or developing solution, in which the photographer places his light-impressed film for further treatment. We can say of the process that goes on in the developing solution that it is simply a further formulative action of the developing principle inherent in the light image, and which begins at the moment when the image is impressed upon the film. Or we can say that it represents a further precipitation or building up of deposit on the pure metallic silver electrons suspended in the sensitive film substance, and serving as additional supply or density of silver metallic deposit to the body of the light image. We can say that the solution is also a liberating and freeing agent, since certain of the chemical substances in it liberate the impressed image, removing the bromide from the metallic silver deposit of the image and bringing it out, so to speak, in clear relief on the film. Footnote: there are, of course, various other chemical actions of a complex kind in connection with this developing process, into which we cannot enter here without complicating our studies. We simply here touch upon enough facts to illustrate our lesson. Back to the next paragraph. Like the sensitized film in the camera, so we have said of the sensitized and impressible state of our subjective thinking that it serves, among other purposes, the purpose of developing the illumined thought image impressed upon this thinking. And we say of it that it is a mind process whereby our mental image is built up from a thinking within. We underline and emphasize this point in order that the student may remember that there are two processes of development of our thought image at work. One an inner mental process and one an outer mental process, as we shall see in a moment. These structural processes are really one and the same, except that the beginning of the outward development of our impressed thought is an internal building up out of the plastic substance of mind itself, of which we have no visible sense evidence for the moment. So in order to induce a complete outward development into what we call matter, it is necessary to have matter of a kind external for the moment to the internal subjective thinking. And this is what we may term the building up of the image thought from material outside of our subjective thinking. This is accomplished by mental developing agents which start into action a further mental chemical process of development and thus bring out or make visible in detail the invisible thought image impressed in our thinking. These developing agents of mind in their compounded nature constitute the mental chemical bath or developing solution of our subsense consciousness in which our thought image is placed. We can say with scientific correctness that in principle they are nothing different than the chemical developing agents which are used by the photographer. Let us see if we can make this statement more clear by a simple study of one of the developing agents in the photographic solution, such as the silver chloride or salts. In chemistry, this substance can be reduced to finer formulations, which the chemist terms subsalts. Again, these can be reduced to free liberating vapors and gases. Beyond these, he comes to a non-formulative point where he stops, and yet by continuing the process of deduction, we can follow the reduction from free gases to a light substance of yet finer modes of vibration until in mental science we observe and recognize this mentative presence in what we here term our subsense consciousness. We can say of the developing process which goes on when the image thought is transferred to and sunk in subsense consciousness that it is simply a further formulative action of the developing principle inherent in the imaged thought, and which begins at the moment when the thought image is impressed upon the film of subjective thinking. Or we can say that it acts as a further precipitation in consciousness, a further building up of the thought, and serves as additional supply or density or body to the thought in a manner which we shall more fully cover in our later lessons. We can say also that our subsense consciousness is a liberating and releasing agent which brings out our imaged thought, so to say, in clear relief to the point where we can cognize it by means of our senses. Returning to the photo-developing solution of the photographer, we observe that it is subject to and capable of various modifications which are determined by the quantity or proportions of the developing chemicals used or by the presence of additional chemical agents. These modifications are also induced by the quality of the developing agents or by what the chemists term the purity or impurity of the ingredients. On these modifications depends the clearness or unclearness of the final picture, its detail or lack of detail, harshness or softness, strength or lack of strength, tone or lack of tone, density or faintness, vigor or lack of vigor, perfection or imperfection, as well as slowness or rapidity of development. This is also true of the substance of our subsense consciousness. It is subject to and capable of infinite modifications which are determined by the purity or impurity and the correct or incorrect proportions superimposed by the kind of subjective thinking which we are accustomed to do. On the presence or absence of these modifications in our thinking depends the clearness or unclearness of the finished outer picture of the mind, its detail or lack of detail, harshness or softness, strength or lack of strength, tone or lack of tone, density or faintness, vigor or lack of vigor, perfection or lack of perfection, as well as slowness or rapidity of development. We cannot here go into detail regarding the various additional chemical developing processes which the photographer finds necessary to completely develop his photograph and to give it permanence. It is necessary for him to transfer his film from the developing solution to a clear water bath, then to a fixing bath, then to a clear water bath again. After this, the film is thoroughly dried and varnished. The light image on it is then transferred to a sensitized paper, similar in chemical composition to that of the film, and which is called printing. Then the print is immersed in a developing solution and a fixing bath similar to those in which the impressed film was previously placed. Here, too, various chemical modifications are introduced, intensifying and modifying the impression. Study of photographic development is disclosing constantly improvements, which are making this phase of photography truly an art and a science of the highest kind. This fact is equally true of our visualizing studies. As stated in the beginning, these lessons are intended more or less to serve as outposts in this little-known region of mental science, where only the wise men of the ages have penetrated. But there is no doubt that the study of mental photography, and particularly of the phase of it treated in this lesson, will make it an art and a science not only of the highest, but also of the most useful kind in our human affairs. Someday we will know how to get permanency, rapidity of action, luster, tone, fixation, gradation, hardening, softening, retouching, and intensification in our mental photographic work as easily as the photographer is able to induce these various chemical modifications in his work. We have already seen that the photo-developing solution and fixing bath in which the photographer immerses his light image and out of which his photograph finally emerges as a real and tangible thing visible to the eye is no different than the infinitely rarer compounded substance of subjective consciousness in which the seemingly impalpable thought image is sunk and out of which it materializes as a real and tangible thing visible on the outward plane of life. All that we must remember is that the various chemical processes, methods, and improvements which the photographer uses in his developing work and which are making photography an ever more and more exact science already exists as chemical principles in the laboratory of mind, and that it is necessary only for us to study and apply these principles as they reveal themselves outwardly in the formulas which the photographer follows in order to get his same perfect developing results. End of chapter 4 of How to Make Our Mental Images Come True by George Schuebel.